Content warning, this episode contains discussion of murder and violence.
There's been a lot of interesting things going on in some of the cases we've been covering, and also as I was looking through my usual news sources, I came across some cases we haven't covered that have some interesting elements that I thought would be worth discussion.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is the Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases.
We're the Murder Sheet.
And this is the cheat sheet. Misunderstandings, missteps, and mistakes. Let's start this week by talking about a story out of Las Vegas. And before we get into the details of it, I want to credit Sabrina Schnurr of the Las Vegas Review-Journal and Caroline Bleakley of KLAS because we use their coverage as sources for this discussion.
And we'll link to them in our show notes.
This is kind of a bizarre circumstance because a person ended up getting arrested for murder, and part of the reason why he was arrested was because he basically provided evidence against himself, and he did so in kind of a unusual way.
Some might say a stupid way.
I think most would say a stupid way. He put a video on YouTube of him performing a rap song, and in this rap song, he included details about this murder he committed, including details which had not been released publicly.
So this was Ken Juan McDaniel, and the murder victim in this situation was a man named Randall Wallace, who was murdered in September of 2021, September 18th of that year to be exact.
And the song lyrics go into a fair amount of detail. Describing, for instance, how he parked his car, doubled back to the murder site on foot, shot the man, describes how his body twitched afterwards. And it's astounding that a person would do something like this.
Commit murder and also then confess to it in a music video. Yeah.
Yeah, every step of the way.
Just... it sounds like it also came down. It wasn't like they just arrested him because he talked about murdering someone in a rap video. Evidence includes the gun used in the killing was found by the ATF in April of 2023, and ballistics testing ended up indicating a link.
Yeah, it was part of the reason. It wasn't the entire reason, the rap song.
It's like part of something that stacks against this guy.
Yeah, and certainly people release things on YouTube that probably they shouldn't.
I don't think anybody should release anything on YouTube. I don't think we should be releasing our podcast on YouTube.
But we do.
It's a mistake. But yeah, it's just sad that, this guy lost his life, and it meant so little that it's just fodder for this guy writing some pretty lousy rap lyrics, frankly.
And just trying to get downloads or clicks or build up his reputation as, I guess, a tough guy.
Yeah, it's embarrassing. I mean, it's tragic for Wallace's family and friends, and just, McDaniel, just pretty big mistake.
Well, I think that's probably as much as we need to say about that. Now let's head down to Virginia. Later, we're going to be talking about a case of possible jury tampering by a court clerk, but let's look first at an instance where a judge seems to have misbehaved.
We talked a bit about this before we started recording, and this is egregious. My goodness.
And our source for this is a story in the Roanoke Times by Emma Coleman and Patrick Wilson. This story begins all the way back in 2018. A young man named Timothy Church committed a pretty violent murder. Now, Church's mother, Grace, is naturally concerned about her son as he faces trial. She wants to do anything she can to save him from a long prison sentence. And at a couple of community events, she is given the card of a judge, Judge Ansley Ware. And he indicates to her, you should call me, you should call me. This is not, I should note, the judge who would be hearing the case against her son. But he indicates, I know the judge who is going to hear that case.
And so, just to be clear, he has no involvement in her son's case. He's just another judge in the community.
Yes.
Okay.
And he's indicating, you should call me, you should call me. And basically, he seems, according to the allegations of Grace Church, he indicated that perhaps he could help her son out if she started sleeping with him.
Wow. Wow.
And this is a woman, as we say, she's desperate to help her son out. Here is a prominent man, a judge. The judge tells her, Judge Ware tells her that, I'm friends with the judge who's going to be handling your son's case. And so she begins sleeping with this Judge Ware. He gives her some legal advice. He says, you should get him a new lawyer. You should ask for a bench trial instead of a jury trial. And don't worry, things will go okay. And don't tell anybody that you're sleeping with me because that could cause problems and your son would end up getting lost in the system. Let's just keep this going. And don't worry, your son is going to get no more than 7 years. And so they have this ongoing sexual relationship. And whenever they meet, Grace Church alleges that she has to sleep with him prior to any discussion of her son's case.
So by her allegations, he is misusing his authority and power in this situation to get sexual favors.
And again, he's indicating the most he's going to get is 7 years. Don't worry about it. Her son ends up getting sentenced to 40 years. And after that, Judge Ware, according to Grace Church, never calls her again.
Is there evidence that he was doing this, or is it just her word against his?
So far, I don't believe he's made any reply to this. Certainly, her filing included a photograph of her with the judge. I would be interested in seeing his reply. This is why we keep on saying, according to Grace. We've not heard his side of the story.
But she has publicly filed a suit against him at this point.
She's indicating that because she was following this distorted advice, maybe she wasn't doing other things she could have been doing for her son. Now,
since this whole situation is unfolding essentially outside of her son's case, even though it sounds like this judge, if her allegations are correct, was overstating his influence here, does it have any impact on Church's conviction?
You could argue that it does, because you could argue he told me not to worry and not to be so vigorous about things because it's all under control. And maybe if he hadn't been telling her that, maybe she would have worried and maybe would have pursued more things. She indicates that she feels that the sentencing judge and the defense attorneys, for instance, didn't pay enough attention to her son's mental health history. And certainly if he's pressing her to make strategic decisions like go for a bench trial as opposed to a jury trial, maybe she only did that because of this relationship.
I don't mean to sound harsh in my response to this or my question here, because obviously if she was indeed sexually exploited by a powerful member of the community, that is horrible and that should never have happened. But how is that the problem of the prosecutors and defense attorneys in his case? If they had no idea that that was happening and this was something that, if the trial judge in his case was doing this, that's something obviously would be incredibly problematic, and I would imagine you'd have to throw the whole thing out. But in this situation, it seems like if it wasn't actually having any influence except over her decision making, she's not a party to the case.
Yeah, I certainly understand that point of view, and I'm not unsympathetic to it. But it's troubling. If it's troubling to me, I think the argument should be made and considered that perhaps this affected her son's right to legal representation. And maybe he didn't get as fair a trial as he should have. And we'll be discussing similar issues, obviously, in a few minutes about the Murdoch case.
And certainly I would say that if there was actually any communication between Judge Ware and any of the figures involved in her son's case, any actual communication, then that does kind of raise some concerns as well. But if it's something where he's just telling her one thing and then doing nothing,
that's less serious. But
it's serious in that what he did was despicable and wrong, if it's correct that he did this. But it just doesn't seem to rise to the level of impacting the case that much, because you could say that, well, maybe she feels one way about what the defense should have done, but if the defense performed competently, then, I don't know what else there is to do here for her son.
One thing I would be curious about is if she's able to back up these allegations. I would be curious, has the judge done this before in other cases?
Yes, that would be very concerning, perhaps cases he had more of a hand in.
Because if a judge is using his position as a way to obtain sex, that's likely not something you just do once.
Yes. And it's not even like an inter-office romance. It's with somebody who you're basically promising legal favors to, whose son is in this position. Somebody who's in a vulnerable place, potentially. I mean, it's pretty egregious.
Yes, it is. So it's very troubling whether it ends up really having an effect on the future of her son's case or not. It's also just frankly astonishing that he thought he could get away with it.
If it's true. If it's true. Yeah.
But we'll be keeping an eye on that to see if the judge responds to that. There have been allegations of possible misconduct also in the Idaho case.
Yes.
This is the case, of course, involving Brian Kohberger, who is charged with the murder of 4 young people near the University of Idaho late last year.
So last time we talked about this case, we alluded to this situation. We mentioned how Ann Taylor, who is Kohberger's lead defense attorney, mentioned that FBI agents went to interview Gabriela Vargas, who is a genetic genealogy expert for the defense, after her testimony. She indicated that she felt that was a violation of Kohberger's rights and that it was highly inappropriate. At the time, we didn't know what the prosecution side was because they filed a response under seal, but some more details are coming out now.
Yeah, to be blunt, the defense basically said this was intimidation.
Yes.
And you could certainly, when we don't know all the details about a situation, it's easy to see them through different lenses. And so if I give testimony and I know the FBI probably doesn't like it, and then the FBI comes and visits me at my home outside of court, you can certainly spin that as maybe they're intimidating me. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're trying to get me to change my testimony.
Yes.
That does not seem to be what's going on here.
Tell us about what's going on here.
So basically, Vargas seemed to intimate through different ways that perhaps not everything in her sworn declaration was actually something she stood behind. There were indications that perhaps she hadn't read it carefully or things of that nature.
Always read things you sign, people. Just don't do this.
And so when the prosecution got wind of that, they asked the FBI, help us figure out what the hell is going on. And so they basically According to the prosecution, they just went and talked to Vargas to try to figure out the situation. And certainly when you look at her sworn statement, there are things in it that perhaps could be interpreted more than one way. And perhaps when she signed it, she was thinking of it one way and then realized, oh, this could be interpreted this way. I'm thinking about things like paragraph 16 of her statement, which reads, quote, "I am aware that law enforcement has obtained results in ways prohibited by the terms of use and prohibited by their own policies," end quote. That could suggest that she is accusing law enforcement in this case of violating their policies. I think that would be a fair reading of that. It's also possible that she just meant she's aware of other cases in the country where law enforcement has done this. And so if she's in a situation where she looks at this and says, oh, people think I'm accusing Idaho authorities of doing this, and that's not what I meant when I signed it, I could understand why she would have qualms.
I think that if this is correct and this is an accurate assessment of exactly what happened, then that's very embarrassing for both Miss Vargas and the defense. It's an embarrassment. I'm not going to, I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but I feel like the defense is kind of continuously putting out very, very high temperature takes and various filings that are very over the top in their wording and their characterization of things. And that's a problem because of things like this, because then this just makes it look like a clown show, frankly. And I'm sure they're very competent attorneys, but I don't think you want to be seen doing this a lot, because I think then you lose control of the narrative and you don't look like you know what you're doing.
Think of credibility as something like a bank account, only that it's harder to replenish once you spend it. If you keep on expending your credibility on things that turn out to be exaggerated or untrue or distorted, people are going to stop believing you. And that's certainly a risk that defense attorneys, prosecuting attorneys in different cases run. If you go out and you exaggerate, people are not going to take you seriously.
Now, if that is just the news media running with something that's not quite the full picture and there's more nuance here, then that would be something that we'd want to engage with and be interested in. But just what's coming out so far, I've personally, we are open-minded on different issues raised by prosecution and defense in this situation. But when you see one side consistently striking a blowhard posture and then failing to cash any check that they write, I feel like it's worth stating that. And one would hope that for Kohberger's own rights and, the rights he has as an American in this criminal justice system, that they're not going to continue doing that, because I just don't think that's a very effective defense. And when you're basically accusing the prosecution of misconduct and witness intimidation, they're sending the G-men to shake down our witness, and then it comes out that, well, maybe you had her sign something that was so vaguely worded that it became a problem for her. I don't know. I just find that's disillusioning.
Let's talking about disillusioning. Let's go even one step beyond that and talk about the Murdoch case. There was a pretty dramatic filing in that case. Some people have described it as a bombshell filing. Usually when people say things like bombshell filings, that tends to be exaggerated.
Yes.
I don't feel it was exaggerated in this case.
This is a bombshell.
This is a case, I think one of us said some of these allegations shock the conscience.
So the Murdoch case was one of the big murder cases to happen recently. It pitted a former lawyer named Alec Murdoch, who is essentially the equivalent of a prosecutor in South Carolina, specifically the Low Country there. He was accused of murdering his wife Maggie and his 22-year-old son Paul back in 2021. And he was convicted. He was convicted in March of this year and sentenced to 2 life sentences. So it was a very high profile trial. It had elements that the media were obsessed with, a Southern Gothic-esque feel to it, family drama, drug addiction on Alec Murdaugh's part. He's stealing money. All these things are happening. The demise of a dynasty of legal representatives in this family. So everyone was obsessed with this case for a while.
Most of the people listening to this were probably obsessed with the case for a while.
We were very interested in it.
There are books coming out about the case. I believe there's a Lifetime movie coming out about the case. And maybe some of the endings of those books will need to be rewritten or changed now. I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from this motion that was filed, which it's a long motion. I think these excerpts are enough to get the gist of it so that we can discuss them. During the trial, the county clerk of court, Rebecca Hill, instructed jurors not to be misled by evidence presented in Mr. Murdaugh's defense. She told jurors not to be fooled by Mr. Murdaugh's testimony in his own defense. Ms. Hill had frequent private conversations with the jury foreperson, a court-appointed substitution for the foreperson the jury elected for itself at the request of Ms. Hill. During the trial, Ms. Hill asked jurors for their opinions about Mr. Murdaugh's guilt or innocence. Ms. Hill invented a story about a Facebook post to remove a juror she believed might not vote guilty. Ms. Hill pressured the jurors to reach a quick verdict, telling them from the outset of their deliberations that it, quote, shouldn't take them long. Ms. Hill did these things to secure for herself a book deal and media appearances that would not happen in the event of a mistrial. Ms. Hill betrayed her oath of office for money and fame. Once these facts are proven, the law does not allow the court any discretion about how to respond. It must grant a new trial. And now I want to read another excerpt which goes in just a little bit more detail about some of these things. Court was not held on February 20th, which was President's Day. After returning from the holiday, Ms. Hill began to enter the jury rooms often. As the defense began its case, Ms. Hill told jurors, "Y'all are going to hear things that will throw you all off. Don't let this distract you or mislead you." Additionally, Ms. Hill and juror number 826, the new jury foreperson, on multiple occasions went to another room to have private conversations lasting 5 or 10 minutes. Sometimes they would go into the jury room's single-occupancy bathroom together. Foreperson juror number 826 never said anything about the content of these conversations to other jurors. Ms. Hill even instructed jurors they could not ask foreperson jury number 826 about the conversations. 2 days later, on Thursday, February 23rd, and continuing through the next day, Mr. Murdoch testified in his own defense. Before he began his testimony, Ms. Hill told jurors, quote, not to be fooled by the evidence Mr. Murdoch's attorneys presented, which at least one juror understood to mean that Mr. Murdoch would lie when he testified. Ms. Hill also instructed the jury to, quote, watch him closely, to, quote, look at his actions, and to, quote, look at his movements, which at least one juror understood to mean that Mr. Murdoch was guilty. Immediately after Mr. Murdoch testified, foreperson juror number 826 told the jury that Mr. Murdoch was crying on cue.
Oh my goodness.
So why is this a big deal?
Oh man, where to begin? You would probably be much better at discussing the legal elements of why this is a big deal. But I can speak to just our own recent experience covering the Randy Small trial, which was carried out professionally by both the Brown County prosecutor's office and by the criminal defense team led by Andy Baldwin and by the judge in that case. And everything went pretty well, it seemed, at least on the surface. That's not a very high-profile media case. We were the only media people there, but there were spectators. There were people to come watch, members of Bob Adair's family, the victim, members of Randy Small's family, and other people from the town. So when we would take a break, the judge would admonish everybody, first admonish the jury, do not talk about the case with anybody. And in addition to that, to the people gathered there, do not ask the jury questions about the case. Don't talk about the case to them. Just leave them alone. Because the way the courthouse was, you might run into a juror in the hallway at some point if everyone's going to get lunch. So just nobody talk to the jury. And I think we were in a position where, because we're press, we kind of ran out of there a couple times partly because we were hungry to go get lunch. But then in addition, that we didn't even want to like be seen near a juror because that is so delicate. You are not supposed to do that as a juror. It could undermine the entire case, and you don't want to be responsible for something like that if you're just covering it. You don't want to have an impact. That gives you a sense of how seriously that's taken, even in a case where there were not media banging down anybody's door about it, frankly. Legally speaking, this undermines his right to a free trial, and it's a disaster for the case. It's an utter disaster.
Because basically, when a person is on trial, this person and his defense has a right to be able to respond to any bit of evidence against them which the jury uses to consider guilt or innocence. If Anya is on trial for murder and the key witness is a storekeeper, she and her team have the right to hear that storekeeper's testimony. She and her team have the right to challenge it in any way they can. That's just simple fairness. And here we have a case where an employee of the state is basically trying to influence the jury by saying you can't trust this man or what have you. And she's doing this in ways outside the view or the knowledge of the defense, so they don't have an opportunity to respond or rebut to it. So she's basically presenting something akin to evidence or arguments which the defense is not getting the opportunity to respond to. And that is fundamentally unfair to the defendant. Not everything they mentioned in there is a huge deal, but there's enough details that are a huge deal that if these things really happened, and there's affidavits and stuff which strongly suggest that they did, then I would agree that there needs to be a new trial.
I first saw this through a tweet from Court TV's Julie Grant, who tweeted out some of the documents, and I was looking at it and posted that in our group, in our Facebook discussion group. And I sort of took the tack at first, like, well, I wonder if the defense is exaggerating. And I kind of, I think I commented on that when we were sort of chatting with some of our listeners in the comments. And unfortunately, looking at this closer and then reading the affidavits, everything sort of seems to be backing these claims up at this time. So I find it somewhat difficult to believe that this is just cut from whole cloth and is just nonsense by a defense that's trying to just throw a Hail Mary. Anything's possible, but this looks like it could be real. And if it's real, I don't see how he doesn't get another trial.
They cite in their memorandum a Supreme Court case where a bailiff made much more innocuous comments, in which a bailiff in another case said, I believe, that the person on trial was wicked, and that person got a new trial.
Oh my gosh.
She's basically saying, don't trust him, he's going to perjure himself.
Based on like vibes, just like, oh, he's crying on cue. How would you know that? You're not, I mean, that they should be voting based on evidence against him, not just like, I got a bad vibe. I have another question, and this, I'd be very interested in hearing from court employees on this one, and I think you could probably fill me in better, but it's more of a question for now. Again, in Brown County, the bailiff would lead the jury away. They'd all file out into the jury room, which was adjacent to the courtroom. I don't know what the layout was in there. I don't know if the bailiff was standing around with them, or I think maybe sometimes he'd be outside. I don't really know how the whole mechanism goes, but why on earth was the court clerk in there with them? Like, how was that even allowed?
It was inappropriate.
Sounds like one person's ridiculous and selfish decisions may cost the work of all this, law enforcement and the prosecution in this situation. Because, I mean, again, I think this trial's going to get thrown out.
You could have a situation where the judge did everything correctly, all the prosecutors did everything correctly, and it's still going to be thrown out.
Yeah, because, I mean, and the embarrassing thing is this book that she wrote. I wasn't even aware that she wrote a book. I followed this case. I wasn't up to date on everything, but I mean, to kind of go on some stupid documentaries and write some stupid book. I mean, I don't know. They're like, oh, she's doing it for money and clout. It must be more of the clout because, first of all, you don't make that much money writing true crime books anymore. Like, that's just not a thing unless it's a runaway hit, which I don't believe this was. It's like you just want to make yourself the center of the story and the cost of that. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of like hand-wringing editorials about how true crime did this. You know, everybody likes to bash the entire genre when something goes wrong like this. But I really think there's something shocking about this because, I mean, you've had experience inside of courtroom, Kevin. In your experience, tell us about like the clerks there and like how things would go.
In every experience I've had with county clerks, they've been very professional and are fully aware of the need to not have inappropriate communications with jurors.
Yeah, that's not like a secret fact that only the enlightened few know about.
Usually with court clerks, when jurors come in to show up and report, they often go to the court clerk. Maybe their name is on a list or something, and they're told where to go. And clerks, no, you're not even supposed to answer questions about what kind of case it is or anything, because that might, you have to be very, very careful. And most people are. You can understand small slip-ups here and there, but these don't constitute small slip-ups.
I could see a situation where the jury accidentally hears her talking to a colleague, like, you know, maybe they're around the corner, like, oh yeah, he definitely did it. And maybe you could be like, well, she just thought she was talking to her colleague. She didn't know anyone was hearing. Like, that's a situation I think is like, okay, that's understandable. This is like she's seeking them out.
And having private conversations with the juror foreperson, even in a single occupancy bathroom. That's odd.
I don't want to necessarily castigate the jurors too much because I don't know what they knew was appropriate or was not appropriate at the time, but weren't they instructed not to talk about this with anybody?
I would not want to castigate the jurors because when you're in a situation that is new to you or relatively new to you, because most of us are not going to be jurors.
I've never served on a jury. So I understand that.
You kind of assume, maybe without thinking about it, that the people who are court employees, they know what they're doing. And so you accept that authority.
Yeah. So, okay, she's coming to talk to me. The judge said not to talk to anyone, but this is the court clerk. So that's probably okay. Or, you know, maybe everyone does that.
Or maybe the judge just meant don't talk to anybody outside of the court. You know, I wouldn't criticize the jurors for not understanding the nuances of the law. I wouldn't criticize the jurors until we know more about the situation, and perhaps maybe there is reason to criticize, and perhaps there's not.
Perhaps there's not. But the court clerk, that is something they absolutely should know. And this just seems like a stunning. It's stunning. I mean, and as you said, everyone can do everything right. And if one person decides, well, I'm just not going to listen to any of the rules and I don't care about this person's rights at all, then this happens.
And the defense will get an opportunity to do the trial over and maybe not make some of the mistakes they made before.
Right. They opened the door to his financial records in this latest trial. You know, so they can look at the mistakes they made and not make those again. And again, one thing like we've heard from people, a lot of people say Alec Murdoch is obviously guilty. I think, I mean, personally, I feel like the jury came to the, well, I mean, prior to this happening, I felt like the jury came to the correct verdict and that he is guilty. But guilty people deserve to have a fair trial. You don't get to throw out the rule book and railroad somebody because you think that's first of all, that's how wrongful convictions happen. And that's just not how our system is supposed to work. So I think we should be outraged when this happens to anybody.
This goes to the heart of our whole jury system, our whole legal system. Anybody who is accused of a crime, anybody, is entitled to a fair trial. And assuming these allegations are true, Mr. Murdoch did not receive a fair trial.
And again, if you're just looking at it,
I take no pleasure in saying that.
No, if you even if you think, you know, I definitely think he did it and he's evil for doing it. We should still be upset about this because just under our system, this is how you get convictions thrown out. And this is how you have to redo trials. And whenever there's an opportunity to redo a trial, the defense has another opportunity to get an acquittal, get a mistrial, and whatnot. We'll be, I've read about cases where things like book deals have resulted in special prosecutors being appointed. There should not be a rush to bang down the doors of, frankly, glorified vanity presses to put your book out there, first. I don't have a problem with people who are like defense attorneys, prosecutors, even a court clerk, writing a book down the road once everything is settled, after you've done everything correctly. But that's a situation, if you're going to do that, you better have done everything perfectly and not done anything vaguely problematic, because it will be dug up, and that is an opportunity for things to go off the rails. So it's not that I'm against any of these people participating in documentaries or the media. We've interviewed people after cases were adjudicated, and it's great. And if they were going to do other projects, that would be fine. But you shouldn't let your interest in doing projects or doing some of your own work come before eclipse the most important thing, which is that you have a fair trial where everything goes by the book and everything is handled well.
And generally speaking, I personally would have more concerns with state employees making book deals while investigations and trials are in progress, because you could have a situation where a prosecutor or whoever has a deal for a book, and then maybe that influences their decision making about how to proceed. If I'm a prosecutor and I have a deal for a book, and there's a person who maybe should be charged, maybe shouldn't be charged, but if I charge this person,
it would be a really good story.
That could influence my decision. For me, maybe this is a bias or something. It seems a little bit less of a concern when it's on the defense side, because I know a number of times defense attorneys might take a case with the understanding, I'm not going to be able to get paid what I'm really due for the work I'm going to do for this person. They're going to let me write a book about them or something.
Yeah, that can be a form of payment, of sort of a barter situation. And I don't have a problem with the state employees writing something eventually, but I certainly don't think any book deal should be in the works during the active part of the investigation or trial. I think there should be a cooling off period, maybe a few years, and then you can look into it. And are you going to get the hottest book off the presses first? No, but that should not be your focus, right? That shouldn't be the focus. That shouldn't be why you're doing the work you do. And I think most of the prosecutors and people on the state side that we've talked to are professionals, and what their goal is getting justice, and their goal is getting the right person convicted for a crime. So I don't think this is necessarily endemic, but I certainly think that hopefully this just underscores going forward the importance of having public servants who are truly in that mindset of serving the public and not capitalizing on their experience immediately, to benefit from all the publicity right after a trial. This is so disappointing, and it's ghastly, frankly.
All that time and effort put into the trial, and now it looks like there'll probably be a do-over.
Yeah. How could they not give him a do-over after this?
I can't imagine.
Just for all of us, Kevin and I are never going to be on a jury.
I can't imagine either of us sitting on a jury, if for no other reason that if you and I are chosen and go in and report and we answer a question, we're true crime podcasters,
we should rightfully be laughed out of the room. That's the appropriate response. But a lot of you may eventually sit on a jury. Maybe some of you have had that experience already. And, and hopefully those were good experiences for you. And if you are on one in the future, hopefully it's a good experience. I often find things with juries kind of uplifting, because it's like 12 ordinary people who are just trying to figure things out and be open-minded and listen to the evidence and be directed in that way. Obviously, things can go wrong, but oftentimes they go right. And I think people in true crime denigrate our jury system sometimes, and I don't think that's right. But hopefully this is just a good learning lesson for all of us that if you are in a jury and someone is trying to talk to you, flag it with the judge because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Don't trust that person.
And it's not your mistake, it's their mistake.
It's not you. You're not the bad guy there, but they are. Whether that's a court employee, whether that's somebody through the defense team, whether that's somebody through the media, or just some random interloper, people want to put themselves at the center of these stories, and they want to use you to get what they want. And, you know, that's a situation where you should snitch on them because that's just totally unacceptable.
Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.